Welcome back to the question and answer section of our video of our book study, looking at Dallas Willard's book, Hearing God. And we come to chapter 4 today. I'm going to first read the questions and give you opportunity to pause the video and discuss them with friends. And at the end of that, I will once again reread the questions and then talk about how my group approached each question and what we felt comfortable with. Question 1. Do you agree with what has been said about the limited ability of stories and signs to increase our faith, whether in guidance or elsewhere? If so, why do you think this is true? If not, why? Question 2. Do you have any problems with the following statement? We mistakenly try to think of God's dignity in terms of what we see in the experience of the great ones among human beings, perhaps a certain exclusiveness, insularity, or snobbishness. But God's dignity and greatness are seen precisely in his lowliness and accessibility to all. How do you respond to the idea of the loneliness of God? Question 3. What is it about persons that makes them attuned to God or to be ready vessels to act on what they hear from God? Question 4. Do you personally think that science makes the idea of hearing God questionable? Can you trace out your thinking on this matter in detail, or can you articulate the thinking of someone you know well on this matter? Question 5. What are the main characteristics of a cultic style of leadership? Have you noticed any cultic behavior in the religious groups you are associated with or informed about? What would it cost organized groups to give up such behavior? Question 6. Do you think you should relate your private experiences of God speaking to your present fellowship and its leaders? So question 1 again. Do you agree with what has been said about the limited ability of stories and signs to increase our faith, whether in guidance or elsewhere? If so, why do you think this is true? If not, why? Our group looked at this, and we do believe that there is a limited ability of stories and signs, miracles, to give us guidance in what God's will is. The difficulty being that in great signs and wonders, what is God trying to say? Even in Jesus' parables, there is a lot of ambiguity. What am I supposed to be learning? Who am I in the story? What does God really think about one group of people or another from this example? With signs, it's even more vague. Well, is God approving of a behavior? Or is he approving of the whole, of all of me? Am I considered to be completely righteous? Am I considered to be completely pure or better than the people around me because God has worked a miracle through me? Because God has answered my prayers. There's always a danger when looking at great signs and wonders. The thing that we should be taking and understanding from any of these things is God's presence with us. 2. Do you have any problems with the following statement? We mistakenly try to think of God's dignity in terms of what we see in the experience of the great ones among human beings, perhaps a certain exclusiveness, insularity, or snobbishness. But God's dignity and greatness are seen precisely in his lowliness and accessibility to all. How do you respond to this idea of the lowliness of God? We agreed that the greatness of humanity, or the greatness of humans, sometimes be thought of as their inaccessibility. So kings are great, or thought of as great, at times because they do not mingle with the common folk. They do not engage with those things. You think of great actors, and these types of people, they go out and they shake hands, yes, and they smile for pictures and things, but they're often encouraged to not take certain roles because they don't pay enough, because the greatness of them as an actor is determined by the greatness of their salary. So they're encouraged at times not to take roles simply because that it's not paying enough, and to take the role would therefore say something about them as a level of actor, that actually they're not worth that much. So that's a very interesting thing, but we do that in society, and we don't do it. We do it in many different facets of society. God, however, is not restricted by any of these things. God is infinite, God is immutable, and so God is not made less because we are broken, we are small. And it's in his reaching out to us that he shows his greatness and making us more than we are. And that is a beautiful thing. It's what makes us love God, is the fact that he first loves us. Question 3. What is it about persons that makes them attuned to God or to be ready vessels to act on what they hear from God? Our group had a little bit of a difficulty with this, simply because what is it about persons that makes them attuned to God or to be ready vessels to act on what they hear from God? It makes it very much about the person. So we couldn't put our finger upon what specifically it is, other than a willingness and a desire to hear from God. But a willingness and a desire to hear from God is a difficult thing, because if we are going along in the world around us and God tells us, or let's say God is trying to speak to us, and God is trying to speak to us to do exactly what we're doing because we're already, let's say, living the perfect life. Obviously we're not. But if we are, and God tries to say that to us, are we really going to hear that as God's voice to us? No, probably not. We might just think that's ourselves. So most often, our group experienced and understood God's voice as somehow giving us guidance, correcting us, or changing us. Well, then the only way we could hear God's voice is if we had a degree of humility that enabled us to believe that what we were doing wasn't the right thing, that there might be another idea or it might be a better way of doing things. And we had to have the humility to be able to change. So what is it about persons that makes them attuned to God or be ready vessels to act on what they hear from God? Their willingness to acknowledge that what they are doing isn't right. Humility, that even the things that they are doing right are not necessarily glories that they should be patting themselves on the back for. And that, to us, was the main thing. Question 4. Do you personally think that science makes the idea of hearing God questionable? Can you trace your thinking on this matter in detail, or can you articulate the thinking of someone you know well on this matter? Our group all knew people who had used science as a way to, quote-unquote, disprove God. And each of us in our group obviously took issue with this. And from my own personal perspective, I always found it difficult that science could, quote-unquote, disprove God, because science is created by God. If God exists, science is created by God. It is simply the way he has done things, and science is our looking at the various different facts and things and evidences around us to understand how more things exist and how they operate. But it can't show us the one that created us. For example, if I am looking at a book, let's choose Hamlet and Shakespeare. The character in the book, Hamlet, can't prove or disprove the existence of Shakespeare from the book, the story that he's in. He doesn't understand that. He can only understand the world that he exists within, not the one who created it, unless Shakespeare were to write himself in as a character and say, hey, I'm the one who wrote the book. Then he could understand that person. So we found difficulty of science by itself actually proving or disproving God. It helps us to understand the world we live in. It is absolutely valuable and important. It allows for much of the benefits and blessings of the world in which we live. But at the same time, the ultimate end to this world is not our greatness, but is to know God. So science is wonderful and amazing, but it has its place. 5. What are the main characteristics of cultic style of leadership? Have you ever noticed any cultic behavior in the religious groups you are associated with or informed about? What would it cost organized religious groups to give up such behavior? Well, cultic behavior, we recognize, is based upon the fundamental charisma and power of personality of an individual to draw people in and then connect them to a certain way of being and thinking and living, and then forcing them through some sort of a manipulation to continue to remain part of that. And what would it cost? It would cost the leader the authority. If the leader can't continue to hold something over your head and force you into a certain way of being, it gives you freedom to act. Now, every parent understands that kids grow up at a certain point and they're going to choose bad things that aren't actually helpful or beneficial for them, might not be helpful or beneficial for the family. But the parent recognizes that this is the part of growth, that they need to do this. Likewise, a leader, a religious leader, needs to look at the community and say, God is speaking to you. And you're going to mess it up at some point. Of course you are. We all mess it up at some point. But you need to, because you need to grow. We grow and learn from our failures as much as our successes. In fact, sometimes more. My attempt to learn from the voice of God or hearing God will be based upon my own failures as well as my successes. And that's just part of our reality in growing. Yes, all religious groups do have some degree of a charismatic leader and drawing people in and helping them. But the goal of any good leader is ultimately to equip and empower the people they are leading for them to stand up and rise up to become the best that they can be. So that's something that mature leadership understands and what we're all trying to attain. 6. How do you think that you should relate your private experiences of God speaking to your present fellowship and its leaders? God is always trying to speak. He's always trying to confer or affirm or share something, whether it is that we are made in his image, whether it is that we are loved, whether it is to correct a behavior that we are living in. God's speaking to us. So we need to, as the leadership of any given community, be able to help our people grow through sharing our own stories, through hearing the stories of other people in the community, knowing that we're not the only ones who have them, and to empower and equip the people within our communities to be able to share their stories in such a way that it points ultimately to God's glory. I've, through my experiences, heard many people give testimonies, and the testimony often sounds much more like, I did this and it went well and everything went great and, I'm awesome. Praise God. And it always felt like, well, no, you're missing something there. Like in any good story, you need to present, of course, the difficulty and the thing that needs to be overcome. But in a testimony, what ultimately you're trying to show is how God overcame the problem, how God pointed out the deficit or the difficulty, and how God provided for a solution, and how you are enjoying the results and the benefits of listening to and following God's word, because it's about lifting God up and revealing that, not about pointing back towards myself. And so leaders need to be able to help people and equip them with that language and that skill set, just as any English teacher teaches a student how to properly tell a story. Now, we all tell stories, some better than others. And through that, of course, we are able to help other people to see the purpose of the story. But us as Christians, the purpose of the story should always be God and Christ. So that is our answers to the questions of Chapter 4, Dallas Willard's book, Hearing God. We do encourage you, of course, to pick up the book and to have a look through yourself and to continue to follow along with these questions, talking about them with your friends and those who you're doing this book study with. God bless you.